Well, thank you all very much for coming. It's good to see some different faces, some interested faces. Welcome, Ms. Likens. Well, Terry and Tom have put a great job together in putting this workshop together today for us today, and I appreciate it, David and Tom. And this is a long time coming, and this sets, like we did with the strategic plan, for what the council's going to do for a while. This should set what the town's going to do on housing for a while as a plan. And what we're looking for today out of this is an outline for the council to endorse, for us to go forward with a plan for this town. With that, David, I'll turn it over to you and your team for which. Go. Oh, yes. I've been reminded I'm 3 minutes late in starting, so that's a bad thing. Alex told me to be on time, so I'm sorry, Alex. Call the meeting to order. Christian, are we in compliance with the Freedom of Information Act?
Yes, sir, we are.
Okay, today we're here to discuss the, Krista, can we do the roll call?
Yes, sir. Mr. Brown?
Here.
Mr. Harkins? Here. Mr. Ames?
Here.
Mrs. Becker? Mr. Lennox?
Here.
Mr. Stanford?
Here.
Mayor McCann?
Here.
All present, sir.
Thank you. Today we're out to discuss the workforce housing framework and answer questions by citizens and come to some kind of a conclusion, I hope, to bring this to council on November 1st, next meeting, right? With that, David, thank you again, and it's yours.
Thank you very much, Mayor. And I'm speaking with and for Tom Lennox. The mayor identified us as two members of council to spearhead the framework initiative. I think my most important words at this moment are to acknowledge, in my opinion, the Herculean efforts on the part of staff and the two consultants. I'm not sure that they've gotten any sleep in the last 3 weeks. We started this process, as you know, in many ways in response to the Chimney Cove crisis. It was a week or two after that at the mid-year update for the strategic plan, that the mayor asked the staff to create a framework for housing, workforce housing, on this for a November 1st unveiling. We're here today for a unveiling of a draft form. I can say I think the bulk of council has not seen this, nor has the public. So we're going to rely on the capable presentation of both Kyle May and Tammy Hoy Hawkins, who are our critically important facilitators at our workshop 2 weeks ago. I'm going to add just a word about that workshop. I think we've had a number of workshops on this island, but I haven't attended one that had the caliber, the breadth, and the experience of the people who attended a day and a half deliberating on what would make this framework practical, efficient, and successful. And today, we're going to get our first glimpse of what they produced. Kyle?
Thank you, David. Good afternoon, everyone. Missy, did you want to do any introduction before we get started?
Oh, I think Councilwoman Ames did the welcome just fine, thanks.
Well, if you're not going to say anything, Missy was the staff member who spearheaded this entire effort, and she deserves the credit. Mark, Orlando Town Manager, made her time available to this effort. And again, it's been a marathon at a sprint pace. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to be back with you here on the island to talk about something that is pretty important. And, you know, over the last, as you pointed out, David, 2 weeks, it's been a whirlwind. We've worked really hard with staff, with leadership, and with our invited guest is part of the charrette to develop out this framework document we're going to talk a little bit later about in detail. My name's Kyle May. I'm a senior associate with MKSK. We've had the great fortune to work with the community on a wide range of different initiatives over the last several years. I served as facilitator through our charrette and in producing our framework, but I have a partner in this work who's been incredibly effective and helpful and influential in the content. Tammy, you want to introduce yourself?
Can you hear me? So I'm Tammy Hoy Hawkins, and I'm honored to be able to work with the town and with Kyle on this project as having about 25 years of affordable housing experience in South Carolina in particular. Also have been involved in the Regional Housing Trust Fund, which many of you are involved in or have been involved in over the last few years in my last role at Community Works, so already very familiar with the town and with some of the priorities. So just excited to bring my expertise to add with Kyle to this framework as the town looks to prioritize and implement some strategies. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tammy. And, we were particularly excited to work with you all through this, this set of challenges as it is a topic that we confront across the country at this particular moment, housing, and the issues that surround it. So as we came into this work, our role really was to listen, to gather, to organize, at the end of the day, to format and present. But I think from today on, it's about developing something that we feel proud and are ready to commit toward. So we'll talk about what that commitment looks like here in just a moment. But in terms of our purpose and agenda for this workshop here this afternoon, I realize and totally concede and apologize for the fact you point us out, Mr. Stanford, just receiving this work. When I say hot off the press, I quite literally mean that. We've been working quite hard over the last 10 days to summarize the work from our charrette and our 35 participants there and what they contributed to develop out this deliverable that you see in front of you today. Now, I will note that, this is a draft document, so our purpose here is to discuss the content, potentially evolve that content based on this discussion. But I do want you all to have a solid background as to how the writing got onto the page and what we meant, I think, David, and for those that were part of the charrette, what we meant by the sentiment in some of the statements that were gathered. I'd like to set the stage a little bit before we jump into the content of this document. Missy put together a wonderful synopsis during our charrette several weeks ago on all the work that has gone into understanding this set of challenges with workforce housing over the last, indeed, 5+ years here on the island. Staff has put in a tremendous amount of work in plans, studies, developing databases, and indeed even testing initiatives as well. So we wanted to talk a little bit about that and set the stage. And additionally, Tammy, in joining this team, has a very deep and broad set of perspectives and experiences when it comes to this issue, not just regionally, but indeed nationwide. And we wanted to share a bit of your experience, Tammy, I think, in this as well as we launch into working through this housing framework, what it represents, why it's needed, why now, and then most importantly here, what it's saying, I think, and what we're asking you all to commit to. And before we break this afternoon, I would also like to just share what I think are the next steps. And I made some help, I think, from participants in the room on what those look like, but where do we proceed from today? And not just in the immediate, not just in the next 10 days, but indeed the next year, the next 5 years. And we hope, I think, as part of this, what this vision may entail for the community in the next decade. So, Missy, in terms of setting the stage, would love it if you could provide just a little bit of background on the work that the town has done to date on this challenge.
Thank you, Kyle. So the town has done a number of plans. So we're building from a really strong foundation of work that's come before today's date. And so the workforce housing framework really builds on a number of adopted plans, both the workforce housing strategic plan in 2019, our plan, the town strategic plan. We have adopted several initiatives that are outputs from some of those plans. And then I'm also going to go through some community statistics and some housing options that are here on the island. So here's some of the timeline of some of the housing initiatives that the town has taken. This is also included on page 12 of the document that's before you. You can go to the next slide. And we're going to talk first about the Workforce Housing Strategic Plan. That was the precursor to a lot of the work that's before us today. That plan recommended 8 key recommendations, of which items 1 through 4 we've been implementing. So there's work that's been done from this plan. So it's nice to see that that plan has been put into some action. But what we're looking for today with the framework is a little bit more definition to do more. Some of the principles, the main principles from the Housing Strategic Plan included that we should be respectful of island character and that we should provide housing for workers but also promote community. There should be a range of housing options, as well as that incentives for housing should be applied equally. So those were some of the basic principles. Our plan, again, is a really foundational document that really set the stage. It has workforce housing threaded throughout the plan in a number of the elements within the plan document.
See, I want to just make sure that our plan is the town's comprehensive plan.
Thank you. Then we have the town's strategic action plan. And in that plan, there were a number of housing initiatives that we are working to implement. There was funding allocated through ARPA dollars that funded housing initiatives. We were looking to explore the Regional Housing Trust Fund, which now we're participating in, and also to implement additional workforce and affordable housing strategies. Next slide. So some of the work that's been done to date, these were recommendations within the Workforce Housing Strategic Plan, is the commercial conversion policy that was enacted, as well as the density bonus. And while we haven't had any projects come in under these programs, we certainly get a lot of inquiries. In fact, I'm meeting with someone tomorrow to talk about a commercial conversion project. So those programs are gaining interest in the community. We also work to program those American Rescue Plan Act funds. And most importantly, I think, and most excitingly, we have the $1 million that was allocated for the North Point Public-Private Partnership, as well as the seed money that funded the Home Safety and Repair Program and the Lateral Sewer Connection Program. So the Regional Housing Trust Fund, the town in just September of last month authorized an intergovernmental agreement to participate in that Regional Housing Trust Fund, which is with Beaufort, Jasper, and additional municipalities within those counties. These are our 2 public assistance programs, sewer connection and the home safety and repair. These programs assist people with improvements to their home, as well as critical infrastructure such as sewer to their homes. We've had 9 applicants for the sewer connection program. You can go to the next slide. And we've had 82 applicants for home safety and repair, and we'll be making critical repairs in those homes in the near term. So now I'm going to go through some of our community profile or demographics and statistics. This slide shows that our population has kind of plateaued over time. So the estimate for 2030 is that we're going to be at around 38,000 population. Next slide. Here's some data. This was from our plan. It shows 2017 labor shed analysis, and the slide following shows a little bit updated data from 2019. And if you go back to the 2017 slide, you'll see the change in the labor shed numbers. So this slide shows where people work if they work off island, and where they live if they work on Hilton Head Island. And you can see there's a lot of communities from a long range. People travel a great distance to work here on Hilton Head. And if you compared the numbers back and forth, so this slide shows that we have, you can go back to 2019, thanks. We have 23,000 jobs that were reported within the census. Currently, 14,820 travel from off-island to the island for work every day. And in 2017, that number was 14,500. So 320 more people are commuting in. And then there's 6,400 people who live on the island but have jobs elsewhere. And that number increased by 415, so that was 5,900 in 2017. And then there are about 8,400 people who live on the island and also work on the island, and that number was 8,900 in 2017, so that changed by 480. So all of those trends are moving in the wrong direction. Also in our workforce housing strategic plan, there was a statistic that showed, and again, these are 2016 census numbers, but that 40% of island households are cost burdened, and that means that they spend 30% or more of their income each month on housing. And I'm sure that that number, if we had updated census data, would be higher. Here's a map that is a little bit of a starter to find our naturally occurring workforce housing on the island. This map depicts some of the affordable housing product that we have on the island, and the two colors, restricted and unrestricted. So red, there's a private covenant, or there is something that housing stock should remain in affordable workforce housing. However, there are a number of other affordable housing products on the island that aren't protected. And you can see Chimney Cove is one of those that's on the map. We have some housing, Habitat for Humanity projects on the island. You might be familiar with this development off of Alex Patterson. The town worked with Habitat for Humanity on this project. Also, we have Hilton Head Gardens here on the community, and it's a Beaufort Housing Authority product.
Thank you, Missy. So, as Missy presents here, as you can probably tell, there's sort of the tip of the iceberg in terms of the data that's available here that backs up and informs the conversation that we've been having the last couple of weeks, and indeed it has been going on for years in the community as part of multiple work products. And I think as you look at page 10 of the framework, and I'm going to keep pushing back to the print document because it's a lot easier to reference and to read and to review, although we will have things on the slides. What we've tried to do within that, I think, Missy, is cherry pick really some of those most poignant, most critical indicators that are contributing to some of this challenge. And less important to us, I think, is the snapshot, what it is, but more importantly, the trend. How is it changing over time? So as Missy rightly points out, that commute onto the island number grows every year, continues to grow with the most recent numbers. The plateauing population, what does that mean? How does that affect this real estate and this market? But as part of our work, we also wanted to understand what's going on around the region with this particular issue, and indeed maybe what's going on around the country, and not just generally with the issue. I think with communities that look, feel, behave, have economies like, demographics like our unique community here on the island. And Tammy, you put together some examples of those. I was hoping you could go through those with us real quick.
Absolutely, and again, I think that the Workforce Housing 2019 plan laid out some very specific opportunities. Obviously, the Regional Housing Fund just was at the meeting this morning, excited about that launch, but we need to think in terms of the town of Hilton Head, how that regional fund plays into the priorities of the town, but also what other strategies are out there that we may want to look at that are similar, like communities as well, and what opportunities that we may tap into. So in several of the research and planning efforts, both the town and a variety of consultants looked at some various towns, but what we wanted to do was look at really 4 categories, and again, you are not alone. Your community is extremely unique because it's not only a beach community, it's an island, it's small, it's in the South, it's in South Carolina. So we could go on and on. As many of you know, sort of post-COVID, South Carolina is the 3rd fastest growing in terms of people moving in. in the nation. And so you're feeling those pressures of just the regional aspects as well as the beauty and the desirable place to live. But we really looked at, and part of this document and part of the recommendations that are being availed is looking at these particular areas. One is sort of looking at small resort communities and what different communities have done and been able to do, whether that's looking at incentives and some of the things that are already being shared and recommended through the workforce housing plan, but also have the same challenges with short-term rentals, and how do we look at, addressing that in the community to make sure we've got long-term affordable housing as well as that it meets the workforce. So we looked at Breckenridge, we looked at Martha's Vineyard as a couple examples of, how they're dealing with the affordability issue, not only today, but for the future. So we put an affordable property on the market today, we deed restrict it for 10 years, next thing you know, we're in the same exact conversation as we were today. And so really thinking strategically about the tools that are available that other communities have seen success in, like a community land trust, which allows properties to stay in affordability and perpetuity, like land banks that do something similar in holding land for future development. So again, some of those small resort communities have put some of those tools in place and had some success. Similarly, we looked at, beach communities, other type beach communities, and what have they been able to do, or especially around workforce housing, because they too struggle not only with the workforce, but also existing homeowners. And how do we maintain affordability for existing homeowners to make sure that we don't see displacement, make sure we've got not only rental, but also home ownership. So there's been some initiative in some beach communities to do home buyer assistance programs or strategically focus on home ownership, like in the communities that you see here. So really thinking about not only the number of units, but we're talking about families, we're talking about homes, we're talking about the long-term sustainability of the island. And so that's not just rental, but it's also home ownership. And then, of course, our southern communities, which we face similar challenges, in these communities, depending on the in-migration of a lot of people coming to the south. And so a lot of these communities are looking at mixed income development strategies, like Missy mentioned, whether that be, mixed use and mixed income, so that we're not only, imagine if everything that was built had at least 20% affordability in it, how many units we could attract and preserve over time. And so a lot of communities are looking at, every time that there is a development, that there's also some opportunity for affordable housing. In terms of financing structures, you guys are investing in the Regional Housing Trust Fund and you're using certain resources for that. But how do we create a long-term dedicated funding source for the town of Hilton Head that can continually address this challenge, not only today, but in the future? And bond financing is a tool that Charlotte has used. An interesting public-private relationship in Charlotte is they created an investment fund working with banks, foundations, and the city of Charlotte to create a $50 million impact fund to acquire existing properties like Missy was talking about. So there's some real innovative tools, not only in development and planning, but also in financing that we could pull from, that we could replicate in the town. And then even going a little bit deeper is the two communities that I've worked most in South Carolina is the Charleston and Greenville area. And again, part of those have done not only regional efforts around affordable housing financing, but created local housing funds to focus specifically locally, down payment assistance programs through the city and through the counties. So there's some strategies around really supporting employer-assisted housing within the town, as well as the other strategy that has really been successful is around, and one of the pillars that we'll talk about is management, and how do we continue to have that ongoing advice that we need, like the charrette, like the different planning sessions. And so both Greenville as well as Charleston had affordable housing coalitions. So in Charleston, we had the Mayor's Council on Homelessness and Affordable Housing, and it was diverse stakeholders from the community that met 8 times a year. They were sort of the advisory group from all different sectors that provided guidance and policy suggestions for affordable housing within the city. And then we would work to implement those and get stakeholder buy-in along the way. The State Housing Trust Fund, some of you all may know, actually came out of that group in the 1990s. So interesting enough, not only was this coalition focused on local initiatives, but also supported regional and statewide. As you know, some of our biggest barriers to affordable housing are not even things that we can control here at the local level. It could be state legislature, tax credits, federal things. So that coalition is an advocate for your town, for your strategies, for what's important to you. Similarly, Greenville created a Greenville Affordable Housing Coalition, and then they have the town and the county involved in it to try to make sure, okay, if we need a bond, the county's at the table. If we're looking at different tax abatement or different strategies for different products, that everybody's at the table going along this journey together. And so, again, as you all know, that funding is key to affordable housing development, but permission. I always say permission is one of the number one ways we get affordable housing done, and that's through the variety of tools and strategies that some of these communities have laid out and been successful. But this is just a snapshot, and it's really just to say, here's some ideas, here's some recommendations, here's some other communities we could further study as we think about the variety of tactics and tools that we might want to consider as part of this framework.
And Tammy, I think bottom line, trying to underline at the end of this, that whatever strategy you land on, where these communities have gotten success, it seems that, tailoring your strategy to the place, right? The geography, the demographics, the culture, the peculiarities of your real estate market or your enabling, state structure is just so key, to their success. And what Tammy provides, what Missy provides, is a bit of a crescendo into where we are at this particular moment. In the work that we've put together for you all and the work that we discussed 2 weeks ago during our charrette, this was about, really developing a commitment to address this challenge, I believe. In this case, at a high order, eventually to be translated into tactics and actions that the community can undertake, but that was the essential charge. And one question you may, ask right off the jump is right on the cover is this idea of finding home. David, Tom, and for those of you that were involved in this charrette, I think one of the most profound comments we heard during that session came from a gentleman who participated both days when we started talking about housing units. He said, you got to stop talking about units. This is about homes. It's about families. It's about livelihoods and a hand on the ladder, right? And backing up from that statement, it was so poignant, it was so perfectly placed that word home started to resonate a lot as we started to put this together. What are we really essentially trying to create with this work? Homes for people that care about this community. The workforce housing framework is built out of that conversation. It's built out of all the work that Missy and her team and staff have put in to eventually be translated, as Tammy starts to preview, into some specific action that can be taken later on. But I wanted to give, before we jump into some conversation here this afternoon, give you a quick whirlwind tour of the document, how it came to be, how the organization structure works, what we think it leads to, and really the meat of what we want to be discussing with you today. This word came up a lot in our discussion during our charrette and in follow-up with leadership. This idea of commitment to addressing the housing affordability and workforce housing shortage in the town of Hilton Head Island. This idea of starting from a point of consensus. Now, when you've got a challenge that is as complicated as housing truly is, starting with consensus is quite difficult. And as we work through this and, as we talk about these statements, I want you to always remember that these words are not mine. They're not just Tammy's or Missy or staff or David or Tom. They really represent the cumulative work of all our participants in our charrette, the work that has gone into previous planning efforts. They're a culmination of that. And organizing around this, in a sense, four sort of interrelated pillars. And I'll describe what we mean by pillars here in just a second. But as we discuss this, and Tammy so rightly pointed out, there are communities that get one of these really, really right, but they fail because they ignore the other three. There are communities that do two. They fail because they ignore the other two. You can't get just three. You have to get them all. As we worked through this conversation, what was really illuminating to me was just how interrelated, but just how critical each of these sections is, and we'll talk about what those are here in just a moment. But I wanted to back up a bit and again, talk about how we got to what's written in front of you right now. I have had the pleasure of working through a lot of meetings like this in communities like yours, around the country. And I don't say this to flatter you. I believe, David, I think you're right. Mr. James, I think you're right. It was a very special group of folks that came together as part of this charrette. But what we wanted to do, and the purpose that we shared with them before we embarked in 10 hours of conversation, was to convene around this idea, right? What do we do? What can we do? Where do we begin to commit? How do we start to define, and I really mean define, the words that are our broad strategy statement, right? Where we're headed, what we're committed to. How do we start to set goals that get a little bit more specific within that conversation about what we are committing to? And within our pillar framework, how do we assign those to these different topics and then begin to think about that next layer of action? Meaning, after today, after this document is adopted, what does it mean that we're doing day one, right? What does it mean that we're doing day 30, day 60, 90, and then well beyond it? This was I would say a pretty interesting conversation along that route. As I mentioned, we had about 35 participants. I'm not sure if any of those participants are in the room.
Some of them are here
If
today.
you could raise your hand, I'd appreciate that. Thank you very much. Truly a broad cross-section. And as we talk about housing, you'll see this today as we have this discussion. Housing is about as sticky a subject as you can get into, right? It touches everything: transportation, land use, demographics, economics. All those things are included in this broad discussion. So in developing a group to talk about it, we needed just as equally a broad a group representing the private sector, developers, home builders, philanthropic sector, nonprofit, and indeed the public sector as well. All those folks had very interesting angles into this discussion because they represent a constituency, they work for a network, they see this issue from different angles. But what was truly amazing, I think, was to see the kind of the resonance around, one, the assessment of the condition, that this is a trend and it is worsening, and two, that we have to do something about it. And as I summarize this, if I get out of school, any of these that were participating, feel free to correct me, but that we have to commit to something to start to address this challenge for these issues. And when we talk about these issues, they tended to fall into their particular perspective. So as we think about the workforce housing challenges on the island, how do they relate to employees, workforce availability, quality of life issues? How do they involve related to lifestyle development and equity, neighborhood growth? All those sentiments were shared, but in service of this greater conversation. So as we worked through about 10 hours over 2 days, taking a couple breaks in between, we elevated some of the language that you're going to see and we're going to discuss here today, whether it's the draft overall goal for our framework, the pillars that we'll discuss, or indeed the more specific strategies of really the how. How do we move forward out of what we now know? So with that, I wanted to take you on a quick tour of the pointed edge of this work, the workforce housing framework. If you have it in front of you, a lot of what we did as far as part one is trying to set the stage, right? So there's a lot of, again, tip of the iceberg work that we've done just to get us to where we are right now, to begin to talk about the commitment moving forward. And when I say tip of the iceberg, Missy, I think one thing we can do within this document is show connection to the huge library of work that's already gone into a lot of these conclusions and data points, not least of which is the workforce study done in 2019. So pulling this together, part two of the document, the workforce housing framework, is truly the commitment that we describe. So in all this work, you all have done planning before, you want to work from the broad to the specific, right? We don't start with the very pointed idea on the specific parcel. We start with a general consensus about what we want to do, what's the vision, where do we want to move, and then based on that consensus and that vision, work toward the specifics of our plan. I talked about the 4 pillars. We'll talk about that here in just a second. Again, those are interrelated, I think, as you'll see. But another part of this framework that, again, I think some communities ignore when they want to stay high level is what we've included in this work about, well, what are the critical first steps? And when I say about that, when we get into this part of the plan or the framework, what you'll see, these are actions, right? Things that we can do and begin to work on day one and make progress on and know that we're moving the ball in the right direction. These could be projects, policies, programs. In a lot of sense, these are really policy-based, but they're how do we create action, out of our work. So as you see, and it's also reflected in the plan, the structure for our work from the top down, we think about that goal, the encompassing vision, where we want to head. Our pillars then break down beyond that. We think about this idea of community, planning, management, revenue, each of which I'll quickly unpack. Below those, though, we have some strategies. So how do we get moving in this work? What are the critical, indeed below that, critical first steps that we need to take? And as we get deeper down, closer to the ground in this work, from the vision down to the actual action, remember at the bottom, you saw from Tammy's overview of the communities like you around the country. What are they doing? They're experimenting in their own system, right? They have a vision, they have a commitment that they've made, but they're really experimenting to figure out what are going to be the most effective tools for them in intervening in this broad challenge. Are they regional in nature? Are they local? How do we affect this? Key to all this, though, is evaluation, and we'll talk about what that means here in just a moment. On page 19, as we get into the real meat of what we're doing, and remember, I'm gonna walk through this quickly, and then we're gonna back up and start this discussion wherever you would like to jump in. But our goal for workforce housing reads as follows: the town of Hilton Head shall ensure growing opportunities to provide more workforce housing options on the island and participate through real investments in the local and regional solution. To meet our goal, we commit to a housing framework supported by the foundational pillars of community, planning, management, and revenue. And as you can see, this is all written in front of you also on page 19. As you remember, this broad, encompassing statement, heavily vetted and discussed through our charrette with our 35 participants, and also reflective of the work that had been done before. Now, supporting that goal at the highest order, I mentioned these pillars. I'm going to mention them a lot. There are 4 areas that, as we have this discussion, really started to self-organize in, if we're going to do this, where do we need to make sure that we're committing action? The first of which, and I mean first when I say first in this, it's the community. The fact that there is true buy-in and acknowledgement from the broader community, whatever that may mean or reflect, that this is a challenge worth trying to solve. It's about engaging, it's about enabling, it's about actually doing a lot of the great things that you're already doing as community leaders, which is working with the broader public. It's about working and building, advocates within this process as you move forward. So whether that's through communication, it's through organization, that piece was heavily discussed during our work, that these are true champions that are out there and available to you and need to be aware of what's happening and building an ongoing dialogue about what you're doing, where you're getting traction, where you may not.
Can I just
Community is
add
great.
real
Of course,
quick
Tim.
to that, Kyle, is one of the things, and again, why community is the #1 priority, was there were 35 individual stakeholders in the room that participated from diverse backgrounds in the charrette, but what kept coming up over and over again was this broader grassroots community engagement that comes to follow, and this engagement from all the way the neighborhood level through the grass tops, and really advocating for that. And I just wanted to emphasize that because over and over again, there was 35 lead stakeholders in the room from various backgrounds, but always emphasizing that that's just the start of the conversation, and in that community engagement and next steps were so essential to engage that neighborhood community level at a broader advocate. And I think that's highlighted here, but I just wanted to emphasize that because I think it's important that it was the broader conversation of we represent a certain community in a certain area, but we recognize there's more to engage.
Yeah. And I think our team members during the day there were excited by this one because, you're not starting from scratch. There is a lot of infrastructure that's already been built there. And in some ways, it's about activating, I think, of those groups. But key within community, we'll talk about this in just a moment, is this idea of communication, right? Everything Missy shared, the data points, the understanding of where we're headed, right? The trend piece of this is just so important for that broader community to understand and how it will affect, no matter what angle they enter into this conversation, their quality of life, their experience on the island, their ability to build livelihoods. But baked into this as well, and where Missy and I think the staff and team and some of these best management practices can come into bear is the idea of planning, right? So as we think about the work, you think, well, planning, is that really an action? Well, indeed, to be able to have the luxury and time to study this issue, to dive in deeper, because even though we do have a rich database of understanding of the challenge here, there's so much deeper we could go. The connections, whether they're regional or local, how this trend is shaping up year to year, but also, month to month. BMPs, I promised I wouldn't use acronyms. But what I mean by those is best management practices. So everything Tammy brings up, starting to evaluate those things that are going on, experiments around the country and what might fit here, developing action plans, department integration, and indeed, I can't underline this enough, the idea of committing to ongoing evaluation. So as you commit a program or a policy or indeed a project, with numbers whether it's working or not, right? And ideally more than one number. How you're headed. But you need people to do this. As we had this discussion, again, another failing point for communities that have done the first two very well, but failed the third area. It's just so critical that we've got someone who wakes up and says, this is a direct quote from our session, this is my job, right? This is my job to focus on this work, to create internal structure that may actually work outside of government and alongside other groups that are already stood up in and around the island or indeed around the region as Tammy speaks to one. The idea of roles, clear responsibilities and functions, and also this idea of partnership. So working with your fellow groups to add capacity in a multiplying way. And last but certainly not least, this was another quote of the money where your mouth is on this issue, right? A commitment as our 35 participants and has been highlighted in other plans that have had success around the country, a commitment in this area requires a true stream of resources. And as we had the discussion, it wasn't just about all those resources being accumulated within the town, but the idea of being able to scale to the need, right? Whether it's about protecting homes, whether it's about adding workforce homes on the island, whatever the use of that, this was a critical pillar for us to explore and indeed to pursue. Now, within each of our pillars, within your framework, as you'll start to see touring here from page 21 onward, we have a series of statements that start to say what our commitment is in this particular area. And what I'd like to do is walk through the four and then back up. So I think starting with our community and then moving through, would love to get the feedback, David, Tom, for those of you that were part of the session, flavor from your experience, during the charrette, but work through each of these and what they indeed mean. I won't read these word for word because again, they're right in front of you, but I will start with the goal statement and a little bit on, what this particular pillar meant to our participants: to engage, collaborate, and inform the community on housing challenges, solutions, and to identify community-led housing programs and solutions. This idea that this is a discussion with the broader community, with neighborhood groups, with leaders. It's about finding leadership. It's about finding advocates and working toward. Remember that each of our pillars has one or two or sometimes three strategies that begin with a verb. And usually that verb is commit. It's committing to what? In this case, and remember, I'm not going to read these all, but maintaining these partnerships and working. And obviously this assumes a significant level of additional action. This Housing Action Committee working with and standing up a group that is solely focused on this and has an ear on these issues at the very local level, neighborhood level. It's so important to understanding where we go. I'll explain this last piece just so that we're clear on what we mean by critical first steps. This does not mean critical only steps. So I want everyone to be aware of that, right? As we think about, again, other communities where they've had success, this menu of steps, right, or specific tactics evolves as it's evaluated. It grows with time as you add capacity, add resources, as you're able to do more. What we tried to identify with this first batch of critical first steps are things we can start off. Yeah.
Kyle, if I could, you're doing a great job. My recommendation to you and my ask is that slow down and explain the strategies, because that's the meat and the potato of this document. I know you don't want to read them all, but leaving here today, what those strategies are most important. So please, if you can, read through them and make sure that town council understands them and the community hears them.
Absolutely. I can definitely do that, Mark. And then I think with that said, Mark, maybe a better strategy here is to take these one by one. So let's begin with community, again, underlined through our work. Yeah, absolutely. So let me just introduce our first two strategies here and open up some conversation. And for those of you who participate, can give some background. Strategy one, to commit to develop, maintain, support partnerships with community organizations as well as regional and state partners to collaboratively address local housing needs. So a lot encompassed in that strategy, but I think a recognition, Tammy, that there are way more folks trying to help solve this challenge than just sit within the island, right? There's emerging regional work that's going on. There's coalitions that are forming. But the idea here is trying to develop and maintain these partnerships over time. In addition, with the Committee to the Housing Action Committee, the idea here is to coordinate with community groups, I apologize for that typo, and housing space to cultivate an ongoing dialogue and engage the community, the housing education, planning, innovation, provide advice and recommendations. This strategy really emerged, I think, from the group, this idea of an ongoing a communication education effort around what's being done in this area and what more could be done. But I want to stop here and see if there's any conversation thoughts on either the pillar, the goal, or some of our initial strategies in the area.
Keep going.
Good?
Good.
I mentioned planning being essential here in an area that most communities do this really well, right? They're good at creating policy or projects. It's about the evaluation. We'll talk a little bit about what that means later. But with our planning pillar, the idea to create social, political, and economic environment stimulates workforce housing, initiates planning, policy, and programming. We have one strategy here, and it's really a permission to commit to create a multi-year workforce housing action plan that will include a range of prioritized housing tactics and tools. This is permission for staff to spend time, energy, and resources in developing a very specific and a very tailored strategy, action strategy to move toward our broad vision. Critical first steps of this are pretty self-evident, but the workforce housing tactic toolbox, developing and maintaining a map of database, and this gets back, I think, something you shared here earlier, knowing what you have on the island today so that you know what you're trying to protect when it comes to naturally affordable. But let me pause here and see if there's any discussion, thoughts, reactions to the planning pillar.
Give a comment here.
Yeah.
It's difficult for council to react to this presentation because only two of us have ever seen it, and it came off the presses an hour before the meeting. And so the fact that you're not getting a lot of strong reaction is a reflection of the fact that we've never seen this before.
Understood. Yeah.
And so you're making a strong and compelling case. I'm very pleased to see my friends, many of the citizens here today that are critically interested in this. Some of the folks were in the charrette, so they're way ahead of us as well. So don't read anything into the fact that we're not having immediate reactions and conclusions and suggestions to this, because this is obviously huge. We need to be careful how we move forward, but still be very committed to doing that. And what I see in this room are the seeds of that commitment. So I'm pleased to see it going on this way, but I just want to
Yes,
make
sir.
that comment.
Yes,
I
sir.
understand what you're saying, Glenn, but it also should foster a lot of questions. I mean, because we haven't had a chance to read it and dig into it, we should have more questions from the council for things that we really don't understand, or we think that he's reading by too fast. So the question part is ours. I know it's wrong we didn't get it ahead of time, and it's a misfortune, but we should have a lot of questions what we don't understand, what we think is happening too quickly.
I'll add a comment because I have been involved. The strategy says, and I think this is what needs to be emphasized, create a multi-year workforce housing action plan. That's a significant commitment for council. And the critical first steps came out of that group of of professionals who were at the charrette, and they were saying, in order to get anything started, these are the things you need to do. So critical is one word. I think you could also almost say mandatory. Thank you.
Mr.
I have a question for the consultants. Is the first goal something that is ongoing, or are you laying out these as a logical sequence? The reason I say that is certainly getting community understanding, support, enthusiasm is critical. We have people coming and going in this community, like any community. We have people that choose to immerse themselves in subjects like this, and others sit on the sidelines and pick and choose. This is an ongoing process, community, from my standpoint. It's laborious, it's time-consuming, it can be frustrating, but you can't miss this step. That said, I wouldn't want to spend time on this step to the point where I'm convinced that at least 60% of the population is on board. So what do you
I would
do?
say it's not sequential necessarily. It's ongoing and it's simultaneous. And so I think there's multiple things that can be happening at the same time. Again, the community engagement is definitely ongoing. As I mentioned, it's essential from neighborhood all the way, to government elected officials. But I think in terms of this this particular planning strategy is something that the staff and the team have already been working on, and we have to continually evaluate. You're right, we have to ongoing evaluate what's working, what's not working, and what new things we could be implementing. But part of that, I think what doesn't really exist right now is that sort of housing coalition that could be that ongoing voice and advocacy group. There's lots of partners that are doing this, but how are we creating synergy and asset mapping those opportunities? But I don't think it's one step happens first or the other. There's several, and that's why the commitment is so important, whether that's to that particular coalition or to us, to staff or some sort of entity that helps wake up every day and leads it. And there's certain aspects of this that the town can do, and then there's certain aspects that community leaders should do. But I think you're right, it has to be simultaneous.
And we worked through, go ahead.
No, go ahead, sir.
I was going to say, we worked through a lot of analogies, I think, during our charrette, right? But we kept coming back to the pillars as really 4 points of contact, right? That are lifting this at the same time. And as Tammy rightly points out, as we had this discussion, worked from topic to topic, what became clear is all these items were interrelated, right? The revenue in service of what? The management, but doing what? The planning, but what projects, what policies does the community support and really want to see as a priority first? So all these things became quite interrelated as we discussed them, as what we try to get to with critical first steps, I think with the help of leadership and staff, is identifying those areas where we truly can start tomorrow, right? It doesn't assume that we won't add, right? Or we won't evaluate, but these are areas where we can actually kickstart tomorrow the effort.
Yeah, I would say that, part of the discussion was these sort of short, midterm, and longer-term strategies and opportunities. And again, what do you have permission to do now as the town council and to move forward? And then what things need a lot more cultivation and discussion, not only amongst yourself, but amongst community leaders and community partners. And so some of those are sort of short, mid, and longer-term.
But you always have this.
For
go ahead, Bill.
example, this train won't leave the station without access to capital, which is the fourth. But so as this starts, concurrent with this step and several others, work has to begin on identifying the revenue source or sources that are sustainable. Because I'd hate to do everything else and then get to that point and say, oops, where's the money?
Yeah.
Absolutely, and I think part of a discussion in the revenues discussion was, what are some low-hanging fruit opportunities that could be implemented now? What are some longer terms? There was talk about, some state legislature opportunities that I know Senator Davis is. So there was a discussion of that broad timeline of what can we accomplish today. But you're right, there are some things that could be done now from a revenue. So it really is looking at those 4 pillars and saying, okay, here are some action items that we can accomplish within the next 60 days, 90 days. But then there's some longer term advocacy that has to happen for that commitment for that full goal to come to fruition.
Those groups you talk about are dealing with the same people over and over again. We still miss half of the island anytime we take an opinion poll because we never touched them along the way. In my opinion, most of you know that already, we need a referendum where people can express their opinion. Do we really need workforce housing? Have we considered yet the impact that workforce housing will make on our community by probably increasing the percentage of 5 to 10 more of the population? Do we talk about the housing? Well, we'll increase the public school system here because most of those housing hopefully will involve families and children. Do we look at how it will affect the hospital here that is 40% vacancy beds now because there's no one to work there along the way? There's a lot of issues we don't talk about in that. So we need some kind of referendum from the people so the people speak as what the people really want, not just the independent groups that have been dealing with this successfully for a long time.
Mayor, may I respond?
Yes, sir, you can. That's why.
With all due respect, I think that the community has to be brought up to speed. It has to be engaged. It has to be provided information. It has to understand the risks before we go to the community and ask them to make a decision about a referendum.
And that's true, but you have to find a better way to inform the community. The community as a whole is not being informed. They're being informed by sections, people that have their own followings along the way. That's how it's getting at, that we are not touching the whole community. We are touching it section by section.
My opinion is that if we went for a referendum, and I'm not saying you're saying this, but if we went for a referendum tomorrow, it would fail.
So if the education is needed, how do we do the education
Pillar 1.
to make sure we're covering the whole island?
Pillar 1.
Yeah, well, we haven't never discussed how we're going to do the whole island. We discussed the groups that are representing these people, because they're all in the pillars, they're all in the surveys, they're all in everything, but the 60% we're missing are not. And how do we get to those people?
Mayor, if I could, I think what you're bringing up was central to the discussion we had 10 or so days ago, which is the idea that the 35 plus folks in that room representing a wide variety of backgrounds all underlined one thing, that this is an issue and that we've got to do something about it. That something varied, right? But what was clear was that the challenge is here and it will only grow with time for various reasons. I think why we started with community, why we kept coming back to this pillar as being so critical is what you bring up, is that does everyone know not who you are, but who we're becoming, right? I think with this trend, there's a lot of things that Missy brings up that we could underline even heavier. I mean, the competition for labor back on the mainland, right? The time of commute, right? The demographics of this community, the plateauing of population and cost of real estate, right? All these things are playing into what is not a stagnant challenge, but it's a growing challenge, right? And will affect, I think when we got into this a lot, the quality of life and opportunity for all folks on the community and on the island. So it was central to the discussion, the idea of amplifying this, extending it. Whether we're on the right set of first steps, these were trying to address exactly what I think you bring up, Mayor.
And that's a big question. Who are we becoming? And when we look in the mirror, who do we want to become? I mean, there's a whole question here, who are we becoming? I mean, are we better off served with putting housing in Bluffton and building park and rides and shuttle buses and do transportation, which is the governor's fourth biggest issue, local transportation with buses and shuttles to move people around? Who are we? What do we want to be? And then how are we getting it? We're going right to housing, but we're forgetting about you're building these housing, and then I'm in favor of the housing project, just so you know. I'm in favor of it. But you build the housing, and how do you move the people around? We went to see some nice places the other day. There's no bottle shuts or car service going through there, and you don't want to put people in a place where you can't get them in and out of there, so they become unhappy very quickly along the way.
No doubt.
I think you're right,
In
Mayor.
physical transportation, when they talk about it here, they talk about roads. It's not. It's the things that ride on the roads that make up the transportation.
And I think that's somewhat integrated in that planning pillar, Mayor, that we talked about, is that it's not just housing alone. It is transportation, it is the other elements of the community plan that's important, but that housing is so critical that there needs to be some prioritization and action on that as well.
But the other things have to be included to make that pillar successful.
People talk about transportation. If there are 14 or 15,000 people coming to the island every day, that represents 280 buses to move that group. Now, some of them are going to drive cars and so on and so forth. But when you start talking about transportation/buses, there are a lot of impractical aspects of that solution.
But when you talk about it as part of the solution, you talk about a reasonable thing. You can't discount it because you're counting all the buses. You got to talk about the part of it. There is no one piece here that fits the whole thing,
Absolutely not.
and it has to be a part of what we're talking about.
I think it's important to say that this really isn't the beginning of the conversation. The conversation started a number of years ago, and I see Lee Lucier in the back, and how long have you been talking about this, Lee? 10 years, 15 years? The conversation started a long time ago when we, as a community, noticed that our favorite waiter or waitress wasn't there any longer. When our healthcare provider closed the Hilton head office and relocated it to Bluffton. The conversation that we as a council got involved in 8 years ago was, we see a serious threat to our island quality of life, and that threat is our ability to attract a qualified workforce. And there are a lot of components of that. Certainly housing is the most conspicuous, but transportation, education, recreation, wages and benefits, healthcare. There are a lot of elements to our ability to attract a qualified workforce, which is the real threat. We are here now, well into the conversation, maybe 15 years into it, saying to ourselves, or asking ourselves as a council, what role, if any, does local government have in dealing with, not housing, in dealing with our ability to attract a qualified workforce? And we have fallen on housing, thinking that's the silver bullet. It's not. We can do some things, but the question is, these things that we can do, will it ever move the needle? I think it's to be determined. And that's why we are here. So what we're talking about today isn't a brand new conversation. It's deep into a conversation that has been going on for a long time. And people like Lee has seen this coming for a lot longer than we've talked about it. So I think the 4 pillars represent 4 strategies in trying to deal with that. The 4 goals, I think, are supported by strategies behind it, but I think the 4 goals that we've identified are real good goals because they're measurable, they're accessible, they're attainable, and it's staff's responsibilities, with the blessing of council, to identify the appropriate strategies and tactics in support of those goals. And I think that's the discussion that we had for 10 hours a couple of weeks ago, and we're having right now.
And I agree with Tom, too, by the way. David and Tom, if you ride around the island, the astonishing number of new businesses starting blow me away. I mean, we've got 8 new businesses coming into Port Royal Plaza. A year ago, it was closed almost. We used to call it the food court. When you drive around different places of the island, there are new businesses springing all up. And it's gratifying, it's amazing, it's surprising is a big word. I mean, where are they getting all their help from? I mean, where did they do their exploring before time to get people to work? There's something missing in this equation here. And the new people that are coming on, they're people that are investing their own money. They're not corporate chains. So we should look into why they're coming, how come they're coming here, and where do they think their supply chain is going to be? And I'll be quiet. Mark kicked me.
I was going to make a comment, but Councilmember Brown?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. I just want to make sure I'm getting back to center here as far as the intent of today. So what we're being delivered today will come before us on November 1st to be accepted or adopted in either this fashion or some other version based on the dialogue today, correct? Okay. So just a few things that are ringing in my head as we have this conversation. Number one, it's very loud and clear to me that all four pillars are equally important and are going to work together over time, okay? I think that there's just a couple of things that I think are missing here at the moment. You started off with the word home versus housing, okay? I think that is critical, all right? I think that's one of the best ways to encourage and enhance buy-in is we're talking about people, all right? So somehow throughout our strategies, I think that needs to be called out just a bit more. I agree with Councilman Ames with replacing the word critical with mandatory. 3 of the 4 pillars to date have a library of information that we can point back to say, this is how we got here, all right? So I think we've, in a sense, already taken some steps, but the next steps, I think, need to be mandatory, or else we go right back to where we started, all right? And the last thing, I'm going to echo as loud as I can what Councilman Hawkins said, which is we are making a decision here, well, we've made a decision actually, to get into the housing business. And there's no business that you can start without money. And that's the pillar that we can't point back to. There are not any supporting documents. And I've said this before, we were blessed with the American Rescue Funds coming down, and we could grab $1 million there to start the North Point project. But what if that hadn't happened? Would we be doing North Point? So without the capital, the other 3 pillars, we're just gonna keep talking about them from now to the next 15 years. So the strategies and the mandatory first steps in the financial pillar, in my mind, need a lot more detail. I understand that we're trying to identify, but I think by November 1st, we need to have them identified, okay? Something. If it's finding $1 million in the current budget, finding $1 million in the next budget that we have no say-so in, by the way, because there'll be a new council doing it. But something needs to be identified as far as financials are concerned so that this ball continues to roll. We're spending money today. I mean, I'm sure Tammy and Kyle are not here donating their time.
We do love you, but yes.
Right. It's going to cost us money to get this done. We need to identify that first and foremost in order for the other 3 pillars to work. And I think that needs to be called out in November 1's conversation.
Well, let me comment to that, okay? I think we should decide the amount of money that we need or in the vicinity of what we need, and then we ought to make it the responsibility of the town manager to find that money. I mean, for 7 of us to come up with different ideas as to where we're going to find the money, it doesn't work. He should find the money between now and May budget section to make sure that money's there. I mean, he knows the budget much better than we do. We're all picking at pieces. Bill would like to put a mill on it. David would like to do something. I'd like to do something. Let's stick it to the town manager, not stick it to him. Let's give it to the town manager. So we need $1.25 million. Find it in the town budget. I'll let him find it, whether it's increased taxes or whatever it is. That's his job. Not 7 different opinions coming from us along the way. Am I?
Yeah.
Don't say anything yet.
I'd like to comment, following up on what Alex is saying. Before I walked into this room, I asked myself, what's the purpose of this meeting? What do we want to walk out of here with? And so I've talked to several of our colleagues informally, and it seems to be a growing consensus that it's time for us to step up on a policy level and ask the question, are the pillars that are being set forth before us today on page 16 or wherever, and if we ask the question, can our town manager, Mark Orlando, start right away marching toward those pillars? The answer is no. What he needs from us at a policy level is he needs a consensus vote, a hard vote, with at least a majority of us saying town manager and staff, or no, staff's his purview, but town manager, start moving forward on these 4 pillars.
That's correct.
And then, in terms of some of the tactics, and on the revenue stream, it could be a mill 0.5. It could be going into the general fund. It could be a few other things dealing with the county and the sheriff activity and that money that's being escrowed. But at a policy level, it has to be, we have to have one adjective in that revenue discussion, and that's recurring. Absent recurring, because we want to create a multiple on 1 year's revenue source multiplied over 20 or 30 years. And to do that, we can go into the bond market with a predictable recurring source or sources of capital. So my suggestion is that we leave that to Mark. But correct me if I'm wrong, we're here today to say, do these 4 pillars represent a direction that we would like the town council, that we would like our town manager to move forward on? And we can't do it today because this is a workshop, but I would respectfully suggest that that be on an agenda, probably the key agenda.
It is on the agenda.
For next. Okay, well, that's great.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
I would like to speak about the community pillar a little bit more. I agree with the mayor that at a time it'll be appropriate for us to have a referendum to test the public will and commitment behind this. But we've learned that education is what is critical in getting a referendum across the finish line. So tactics, to me, mean we organize a committee that organizes a whole series of public forums in churches, in Rotary clubs, in community clubs, in neighborhoods, all of this, come up with a strategy with people that are armed with a PowerPoint, armed with data, that can go out and demonstrate what I think is the crying need for this action here in this community. So that's a tactic that I would strongly recommend under the pillar of community, which is what we started talking about here in the first place. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you. And Mr. Stanford, I'm going to ask a question in a second on is what you just asked for in one of these critical first steps. So the way I looked at the framework, the direction you gave, really the direction you gave Councilman Ames and Councilman Lennox a couple meetings ago, and then we mobilized as we brought, I would call subject matter experts from different places with different skill sets and different interests to a room together, right? And the goal was, or the expectation set to me was to establish a framework. And so the framework we're here today, I'm glad we're talking about this because it is important. I think we got off and to a great start, but what's the ultimate goal today? The ultimate goal today is to take a look at a document that you will have on your agendas at a town council meeting on November 1st, as you directed me to have it there. Missy's worked around the clock with a great team to get it there. But the framework, the way I see it, is simply a set of goals and strategies that will be used in our decision-making, right? In the future, to guide a more detailed set of policies, actionable items. In this case, that's what we have. In addition to that, we do have some immediate first steps. Call them what you want. Call them mandatory, call them critical. They're first steps. And so what I would walk away from as the person responsible to implement your policy directive on November 1st are those goals, strategies, right? Those are pretty simple. We know what those look like. But those critical first steps allow me the confidence to spend more time with staff to advance this initiative, right? So case in point, North Point Housing Public-Private Partnership, that became a work plan, that became a priority through a workshop based upon a request, right? Had that been baked into your critical first steps, you would have been looking at this in whole, not in part. So I think for me, that's what I'm trying to understand today, right? So I think it is important, and we'll slow down for a second to say, let's focus on what the several strategies are to accomplish the goals, right? Out of the 4 pillars, break them down. And then let's go back to what those critical first steps are. At least from my vantage point, what you're asking for are in some of the critical first steps. So when we get to housing, you'll see recurring revenue. I did not take, I didn't assume how much money, how many funds you want every year. I didn't put $1.42 million and bring that forward. We set a recurring revenue stream, knowing we talk about it today. So if we could, let's perhaps back up for a second, slow down and talk a couple strategies. Let's slow down and talk a couple critical first steps. And I think that when we look at all 4 pillars, they all have to be done in different increments at different times and lots of them at the same time.
Mark, the framework is there are 4 goals.
4 goals.
And 7 strategies.
You got it. Yes, sir. And
Framework.
yes, sir. Okay. So we went through the community strategies. What's the next one we were looking at?
We were talking about planning.
Went through planning, so commit to create, and Kyle, I'm going to back up
Yeah,
and jump in a little
sure.
bit, just to help us. Create a multi-year workforce housing action plan. So we didn't bring the toolbox to the room today.
No.
We know
12 pages.
well, the 12, we have to critically vet, right? And we have to right size, and we have to calibrate those tools for our program. And just throwing the kitchen sink at it because they did it in Breckenridge or Martha's Vineyard or Sarasota doesn't mean it's right for us. Know, though, that as a takeaway, know that we've researched pretty much we went to Lowe's pretty much and spent some time in the tool section to know every single tool you could possibly put as a tool in your toolbox to move this forward. So knowing that the strategy would be to create this multi-year workforce housing action plan, we would work with the community, with experts, with town council to further develop that toolbox in the future, right? I think I'm saying that right. And you'll see the critical first steps are create a toolbox and develop and maintain a map of all housing units on the island. Knowing what's out there is most important. What's the next one?
Get into management then, Mark. And, in this pillar, Mark, when we discussed this was getting back to the idea of whose job is this or whose jobs are these. The idea of establishing a program, policies, advanced workforce housing opportunities. The strategies under this pillar, Mark, again, 3 commits, but to adding dedicated staff to provide coordination and planning. Commit to explore the creation of professionally managed housing organization, keyword there being explore, and to commit to maintain a dashboard of core metrics. This gets back, Mark, to the idea of knowing, right? The idea of growing and knowing, and how important that would be. There were 2 critical first steps within the management pillar, Mark, as we worked through this to develop this asset map of existing partners. This was important in the discussion of knowing who's doing what actively today, right? In terms of a first step, having some understanding of what this web of active organizations, individuals, neighborhood leadership that already is existing today and could be activated. The other piece of this is a recruiter hire at least one staff person. This gets fairly pointed in the idea of we needed an individual to be tasked with advancing this. In this case, inside, but the idea that there's external capacity as well. But in terms of spirit of starting and where do you start, this idea of having a staff person, as many communities like you do, including many of those listed, Tammy, on your sheet. Having someone whose job is to focus on these issues. And I'll stop there, Mark, and see if there's any discussion. Yeah.
Tammy had a question about 3 seconds ago.
Tammy, yeah.
Thank you, Mayor. It's not really a question. I want to say first that I'm happy to hear the change in language from housing to home. I've been talking about it in this way from the beginning. Much of the initial conversations that have been had were not aligned with my way of thinking, and it seems as though there's been some adjustment to that, and so I'm pleased by that. But the other comment that I have really at this point is similar to Councilman Stanford's, that we just received this. There's lots of language in here that I want to read and I want to understand, and especially the particular words used. Those are used for a specific reason, I'm sure, and I want to make sure that I understand them in the context of what they actually represent. In terms of mandatory versus critical versus the word shall throughout here, I am tentatively listening to all of this, because when you agree to a framework that has mandatory and shall and those types of words, what you're indicating, quite frankly, while it's subject to the future conditions, it does set forth that this is something that we've agreed to, and that's not currently a comfortable place for me. The other piece is, there was, in Tammy, in some of your discussion, you mentioned that there was discussion between community leaders and community partners. And like our mayor, I think the missing element in that is the residents, that the residents in whole haven't been heard. And so that educational piece that was described by Councilman Stanford is critically important. I want to know what they think. I want to know across this island what more than 35 people and 2 of our council members and experts in the field think before I'm prepared to be able to make any recommendation. I quite frankly think that November 1st is too quick. We've had this meeting, and then we're going to go right to a meeting where there'll be a vote. I think there needs to be a second meeting after this one, after we've had an opportunity to read, digest, and speak to our constituents about what's been presented here, before we can confidently say we represent our
Let me answer that question, okay? Anybody in the
constituents.
council that has questions after they read the material, please send those questions to Missy. We will try to get back to you by Friday afternoon. It is on the November 1st agenda. It will stay on that agenda.
Right.
But we
So-
will try to answer the questions by the end of the week, so everybody has their questions back. That fair? Done.
Thank you, Missy, for taking our questions on that. I think I'm referring, and I understand that you want to keep it on the November 1st agenda, and I respect that. What I'm suggesting, though, is this is a big chunk of increasing government, raising taxes, and that is something that the residents should have a firm understanding of what we're doing. And I would like to put it in the bigger context of all the other initiatives that we have and the costs associated with those. So the revenue piece of this is critically important, right? So those are questions that I have that I appreciate the time to figure out.
Appreciate
Thank you.
Back to you, Tammy. Tammy to Tammy.
Ms. Berg, I appreciate your comments, absolutely. I did just want to say, in terms of community engagement and input and support, one of the critical streams into this process, you think about the hour plan, the community engagement that led to the comprehensive plan, a lot of that work is referenced as part of this broader effort and broader conclusions that are brought up in here. But I certainly appreciate everything you bring up in your comments.
And I think that's true. I think that's absolutely true and a valid statement. I will read it carefully. I will submit questions to Missy based on my thoughts as well as my constituents.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I would just,
Mayor,
Yes, Mr. Bill.
so, I don't want to belabor the point, but I just want to hear again what's going to be the agenda item relative to this meeting today at our November 1st meeting. My understanding is that we have 4 goals, the pillars, and we have 7 strategies. And we are asking ourselves today to deliberate on this during the next couple of weeks, and then come together as a body, as a board, if you will, on February the 1st to vote up or down as to whether management should be charged to act on the 4 goals and the 7 strategies.
That's correct. That's all.
That's it.
Yep.
Pages 22 to 25 is the Cliff Notes. And that is, and to David's credit, David said we ought to build a framework around this issue because we've been talking about it for so long. And that framework is pages 22 to 25.
In today's workshop,
And each of these pillars are equally important. You can't build this with three. You can't build it with two. You can't build it if there's different elevations on different pillars.
Oh, it's either wall or none, Bill, you're right. Okay.
what we wanted to do, if I could, to have a workshop today, because like they said, hot off the press, this is probably version 4 over the last several days, really focused on the strategies and the critical first steps. The meeting is a week from today, November 1st is a week from today, so packets will go out. If we get out of here sometime sooner than later, the packets will go out Thursday morning, maybe Wednesday afternoon. I know we have a couple edits to make to this. You will have, and the community will have this document. The agenda item will be Town Council consideration to adopt a workforce housing framework for the town of Hilton Head Island on the November 1 agenda.
The package will go out Thursday, yes.
And I think Tammy Hawkins made a good comment earlier that there's a potpourri of resources to draw on to be successful. Some are at the federal level, some are at the state level, some are at the local level. There are other sources in the private sector, foundations. Some we know of, some we haven't even scratched the surface yet. We are talking about launching something, not in a singular fashion, putting the 100% of the burden on the back of the town or the back of our citizens. We're saying that this is a complex endeavor, as Kyle said. It's an endeavor that creates an opportunity to draw from multiple sources to make something happen. But Kyle also said that if you don't organize a battle plan under the planning pillar, you'll never get to first base. He's also said, or you said, without community understanding, which has to be ongoing, which is community education, this will fail. And we've also said that from a management standpoint, this is going to require expertise that maybe some people have within the organization, some may not. Some may have to be brought in on a consultative basis, an ad hoc, or a combination of the above. And we've also said there can be, and we know there are, multiple revenue streams that can be recurring and sustainable to make this work. So we are not today, or a week from today, saying this coordinated complex endeavor is going to result in product A, B, or C. It's going to result in a process that can create homes for people that would like to live here and work. So.
Now, do you summarize the meeting? Should I join it?
No,
I learned by talking out loud, so
and I appreciate that as one, because these are the types of conversations that over the next week I hope to have with my colleagues and others, to be able to hear those types of very, very well put together thoughts and insights.
Let me cut you off. Alex?
Yeah, before we leave the management pillar, I guess this is a question for you, Mr. Orlando. In our current business model, which for the most part, all of our initiatives fall within the strategic plan, and then accountability falls back to either some subcommittee or internally with town staff, okay? How do we see the management of this particular work framework, I guess, panning itself out down the road?
Well, you know, I really, if town council adopts this framework, that starts to build this multi-year workforce housing action plan, right? And we grow it, we learn, we calibrate. All of that gets baked into your strategic plan. The next time you're at the drawing board with strategic plan, of course, I'm going to have a housing action plan based upon the framework as part of your strategic plan recommendations. So just marry them together. And to a degree, a piece of this is already in there. If you take a look at the strategic plan, contemplation of advancing housing programs are in that strategic plan that came out of the strategic plan, that you adopted last year.
Yep.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does, absolutely. And as we have our next strategic planning session, we'll be able to talk to it a bit more
Yes.
as to direction.
Yes, sir.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Kyle, back to you.
I was going to make one comment,
Tammy
if you
too,
don't
go.
mind. Tammy and Tammy are sitting next to each other. But I did want to, first of all, just recognize Councilwoman Becker for her comment about community, because I've worked in communities my whole life, and I totally appreciate that. And I wanted to just mention that I think part of this permission to act, for Mark and the leadership team to act. Part of what was so important in that first community pillar was permission to engage and create this ongoing community conversation that could then address whether it's a referendum or things like that, that we're creating that community campaign and strategy. But it's sort of like, what is it, the chicken or the egg? And the permission to act and to the political will of this body to say, this is so essential and important to the livelihood of the town and the future, that we are willing to act and give permission to at least move forward. And I think hopefully that community and that coalition and that advocacy, mandatory, critical, like you said, first steps, is embedded in here to give comfort that that's a critical component of that ongoing conversation. But I just wanted to reference that because we have studied communities to death in many cases, in particular in community economic development. And so we did want to be thoughtful about what the feedback we received in those past plans. But you're right, that ongoing communication and hopefully part of what came out of that community pillar is that. And so I just wanted to reference that and that permission to act and moving that forward to keep that dialogue going. Because it was absolutely essential in every city housing community that I worked in.
And that's the confidence I need, right? The political will, the confidence post-November 1st to actually move forward on some of these initiatives. So trying to keep it simple. We have one last one. I think you already, most of you said.
Done it a little bit.
Well, yeah, and not to be ignored within this conversation is, where are the resources to fund the great ideas that flower out of the planning conversation, or through the community that we work with that has ideas about how we should invest, or our managers, what do we do? How do we create a sustainable model, multi-sourced model? And this is a very much an underlined couplet there, the multi-sourced piece of this, right? That you're lucky as a community to be fairly well-resourced, but I think when we think about how does this thing become an ongoing sustainable set of initiatives, that is key. We have a strategy, a single strategy within this, but it is large, to commit to a funding plan that meets the needs of multi-year workforce housing action plan. The idea that we have projects, policies, programs that begin to flower out of that garden, and that they are fundable at some scale that helps us to make a difference. And again, I want to reiterate that within this discussion, Mayor, I think you bring this up quite well, is the very literal idea of just building a home or a housing unit was only one part of a very multifaceted discussion on this issue, right? Transportation was critical in this, right? The transit connections, tapping into existing, we call this naturally occurring affordable housing, NOAA housing that's here. How do we protect those units in the long term? All those pieces were part of that discussion. So literally adding units, not units, homes, was only one part of that. And this committed to funding plan in service of what, I think, is the key thing. first steps, and there are three within this section, Mark, we talk about establishing recurring funding sources that are allocated for workforce housing. This was important to our group. This has been important in a number of your past plans, that it's not just additional money, it's money specifically for this issue. And allocated for this issue. Possible town revenue sources for workforce housing program allocation. A lot of words there, we might want to trim that one, but essentially that we have this recurring fund. And also the idea, not lost within this, and I think a number of you have already brought this up, that we don't have to be alone in the woods in helping to solve this. Again, there are partners, there's a network of potential financial partners, not limited to the private investors or philanthropic organizations, banks, et cetera. As Tammy knows, this is a big boat, a big ship endeavor.
I just wanted to add to that because Councilman Harkin made a great point about these variety of revenue sources that are out there. I think what you probably have learned as well, though, is many of these revenue streams, whether they're federal or state or tax credits, ask for a local commitment. So if a project of interest is going to happen on the island, state housing absolutely will say, what's the local commitment? What other funding sources are leveraged? And so for projects to come to fruition, I think that leveraging point of what the town can do, but then what these other entities can do to bring other types of revenue streams to this work, and that's really essential.
At the end of the day, we talk about building something or funding something. This is green light, red light, right? You're either getting it done or you're not. And I think when we talk about that, what creates the green light is the ability, and this came up a lot during our workshop, or the charrette, was how do we fund the gap, right? Even if the large source is federal, state, philanthropic, whatever it might be, how do we make sure that that gap is covered in the work? Key to this revenue pillar. Let's stop here and discuss.
One comment on that is that certainly having skin in the game is obvious. That's required. As we look at revenue sources, all revenue sources are not created equal. Some will have a neutral impact on our bond ratings. Some could have a negative, and some could have a totally neutral. So as we look at revenue sources, I would respectfully suggest that we heavily weight those that don't tamper with the strength of our balance sheet.
You know that Mark and John won't do that.
Of course, but I don't see that as
No, I just
a
want to make sure we
criteria,
all
but
understand. It's not a question, it's a statement.
Of course they would do that.
I know you do. Yeah.
Right.
Don't break your fingers.
But it's important for the public to hear that because
Sure.
people could say, all right, well, you're using town money, you're weakening the town's financial position. And if we're careful, the answer would be we are not.
And that's the benefit of having that first step being identify possible town revenue sources for workforce housing program allocation. As we identify that and we bring forward that analysis, that assessment to you, that's the information we'll bring. Okay.
We would work with bond counsel. Great. Okay.
You have anything more to say, Kyle?
No, just last on this particular pillar, similarly with planning, it's hard work identifying, where all that oil under the ground is, right, in this particular pillar. So the surveying work, the connections, the relationship building, that gets back to management, right? It gets back to to planning, and understanding what you're trying to fund then goes back into the community pillar, I think, Mayor, and the idea of, how are we communicating why we're doing what we're doing, why we're funding what we're funding. This is really, we believe, if initiated and committed to, a very righteous cycle, right, that you can begin to work through. And excited to be part of this conversation with you all. Thank you very much.
I'd like to do, I'm Terry. Got something to say, Tammy?
No, I would just ditto what Kyle said, and that it could be multiple sources. It doesn't have to be just one. And whether that's your definition of the source, you all decide, but also leveraging some other state opportunities will be critical.
What I'd like to do now is have final questions by members of the council, and then go to the public for comments. We'll start with you, Tammy, because you're first.
I said everything I need to
Okay.
say for that.
William?
I look forward to November 1st. I truly believe that there's a need for this in the community. We've heard from many people for many months that there is a need. Certainly, there's a need for transportation. Certainly, there's a need for employers to look at the competitiveness and the fairness of their wages. That's their business, but that's important. But when you put a face on this subject, that face can be found in a restaurant when you've been waiting there for 10, 15, 20 minutes and leave. You know, that face can be on a family that has to cross the bridge every day and never gets to see their kids play ball in the evening. It has multiple faces, and certainly we can't be all things to all people in this. But our biggest role, I think, is to use our talents to create the framework, to be a convener, and yes, to create a corpus of money so we can have a skin in the game. But it's something we should get on with.
Glenn?
I want to say that I am extremely grateful to Missy, to the rest of the people that have worked so hard in putting this together. This is assimilated and defined a problem for us. Now it's up to us to establish these goals, not all the strategies that are underneath it, I understand that, but to establish these goals on November the 1st and come up with a plan to where we're actually able to get this done. And I also want to express appreciation to the citizens who are here, who are very vitally interested in all of this, because your input to us is going to be invaluable to us. And finally, to David and to Tom, great leadership. Thank you, my friends.
Alex?
Yeah, many thanks to Councilman Ames and Councilman Lennox for taking the lead on this. Kyle and Tammy, thank you all for y'all's time, and of course the rest of the staff and those that participated in that day and a half. I will say that the statements that I'm about to make are not just for the council, it's for the community as well, because this is an everybody issue. And I can't help to think of the word deja vu just a little bit, because we adopted a plan in 2019. So we're back again. And the reason I say that is because we as a community, particularly leadership, have to look at this more expeditiously, okay? And I wouldn't spend as much time studying what other folks are doing versus figuring out how we can do it on Hilton Head. And what keeps coming back to mind is a statement that I made when we first had the Chimney Cove crisis come before us, is the beach renourishment. I sat in a community services meeting on yesterday. We had no beach in some areas. The rock that we were using to protect the shoreline, you don't even see it anymore because it's buried by the sand that we have put on the beach. So we made the commitment, we found the money, and we got the job done. Now, when you look at other coastal communities that have the same issue, they have not been able to solve the issue the way that we can. So let's focus on Hilton Head style of solving issues, not everybody else's, okay? I know that there's some examples we can borrow from, I get it. But we need to be a leader in this one. Because if we don't, the very rocks that we have in front of this affordable housing issue at the moment will continue to bear themselves. And we won't be having a conversation about educating the public. We'll be having a different conversation about how we're going to get back to being Hilton Head that we used to be. And I think that's very important for us to think about as we move into November 1. I mean, this is not the first step in developing a plan. This is the first step in action. and moving towards solving this. And it can't be one of our other issues that kind of show up every quarter. It's a day-to-day grind to get this done. And that's the attitude we're gonna have to support Mr. Orlando in taking on this project. So I just encourage us on November 1 to come prepared to move forward. The community's ready. I know that there are questions at hand, absolutely. But the community is ready for us to move forward. They've already talked about it years ago. Councilman Lennox said 15-year conversation, may have been going on further than that. Action speaks a lot louder than words. Those are my comments, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
But as a member of the senior committee now, you're responsible for bringing this project along and sharing your thoughts with the other 6 members that are here. So we can get to this meeting next week together. And we can't just say what we didn't do. You're a leader in this group. You have to make sure you use your leadership.
Absolutely. That's why I started off with, I'm not just having this conversation with my colleagues, I'm having a conversation with the community at home.
I just want to make sure we're all on the
Absolutely.
same page. Mr. Lennox, thank you again, you and David, for what you've done.
I think if we commit to these 4 goals and the 7 strategies that are the framework of the plan that David so skillfully led, I think the recurring nature of this, at the very minimum, will be annually at budget time. You as a council, you as a community, are going to weigh in on how important you think this is and where in the allocation of resources the town should prioritize it. Is it at the top or not? Because that annual budget that's done in open public workshop and open public council sessions will determine how much commitment you as a community and we and as a council have to those 4 goals and 7 strategies.
Thank you. David, thank you again.
You're welcome, Mayor. A couple of comments and then a couple of questions. You asked what questions we had. I posed the thought that the success of Pillar 1 community is when the citizenry of this island chooses to own the plan. Put another way, it wants to invest in housing as a solution for the future of the community and the island. Alex mentioned leadership. I think a source of the community pride that I felt and that others in the community felt early on was the leadership that the island took in planning community differently than other resort communities along the coast. And so I agree with Alex that this is an opportunity for this community to do something better and differently for our community. All segments of the community deserve the kind of respect and commitment that we're talking about in this framework. The questions that I would ask are, for the council, does this framework hold together? And then the second is directed to Marge. Does this give you permission to act for each pillar? Does this give you clear direction so that you can move forward after this council adopts this framework? Thank you. Those are my 2 questions.
Thank you very much. Questions from the audience? Oh, I'm sorry, from the residents. Who's first? Terry, you're up front. Might as well go first. And then followed by Lisa. You're not talking today? Okay, Lisa? I thought that was...
Thank you for this opportunity. I'm here today on behalf of the Coalition of Island Neighbors, and it's the only person called just a community advocate participating in the charrette. All of my peers had all sorts of names and titles behind them. And today went a little different than I expected. I came in here with prepared remarks, and you can see I've marked them up as the day went on. I want to go back to our plan. It's what we, the people, told you is our desired community. Our vision is, quote, to focus on revitalization and modernization and to build an inclusive and diverse community. We gave you this mandate. It was developed by us. And this town council adopted that vision, and you promised to do the work to get us there. We collectively cannot create that inclusive and diverse community without finding a way for people who want to live here but are priced out of the rapidly dwindling supply of long-term rentals and entry-level homes to become a full-time part of our community. What we do know today is that there aren't many businesses here with a large enough financial base to build employee housing on their own, and that what you enacted since the 2019 Sturtevant study hasn't worked. We now know that density bonuses and commercial redevelopment incentives haven't provided a meaningful enough benefit to the private sector to yield more below-market rate units. We recognize that this framework is another starting point, and we don't yet have a complete plan. We know it's more than just housing. It includes transportation and childcare and healthcare and infrastructure. Today's data is imperfect, and the details will take time to develop. But we can't wait for perfection when we know there are people who lose their island homes every time a lease renewal comes up. Every month of delay increases the gap between what we have and what we need. Right now, we are exceedingly fortunate to have 7 developers who are interested in the North Point project. Yet 6 of them will be disappointed when that partner is selected. We can't squander this interest. We need to demonstrate the town's real commitment to private-public partnerships, and we must quickly identify other island sites so Hilton Head might remain under consideration by these developers. Right now, there is one action step that this council can take as a first step, and that is to create a dedicated and recurring funding stream for community housing. We know we'll need it. We know that it may not be complete, but you can take that one step today and kick us off. Please consider doing that.
Thank you, Risa. Next, anybody else? Yes, ma'am. Your name and address, please. Your name, please.
My name's Reverend Julie Reno, and I am a member of the Home Coalition. And we have received kind of a permission and a goal to videotape and document our progress here. And we would want to know, we're starting that with Federici Video, they are volunteering all their time. And what we need at this point is we are beginning to start to tell the story, the wider story and the individual stories, so that we could promote and advocate for what we're doing and actually document how we've done this. Because years later, we're going to say, how did that happen? Who were the people? Where were the sources of stress that we offered to the community? So we don't quite know at this point how to edit our stories. We are starting to edit our individual stories. And how would you want to use them? Do you want to use them to advocate, to do some fundraising? Do you want to use them to send to developers, to some of the revenue sources? We really need to hear your direction for how these could best be used so that we could start to hone and edit those pieces that we're starting to create. We were at the luncheon last week, and we've documented that, and we are beginning our individual stories tomorrow. So if you know people and you know a way that we can put this story together visually, please let me know. Can I give you my number?
I suggest you send a letter to the town manager, Mark Orlando, explaining to him what you want to do, and he'll get back to you, rather than contacting the individual council members.
Okay, so email is your best route?
And I
He'll give you his card. Make sure it's not mine.
apologize for not being able to get up. There you go.
Next? Yes, ma'am. Oh, two ma'ams. I'm sorry.
Hi, I'm Sandy West. I want to say good afternoon. I am also a member of the Home Coalition and supported a recent workforce housing lunch and learn, where 120 of our fellow citizens joined to get a deeper understanding of the opportunities and the issues. We had hoped to attract 80 people. We had 120, and we had many people on a wait list. The Chimney Cove situation certainly seems to have served as a wake-up call, a long overdue wake-up call for our community. I appreciate the recent efforts that have been made, and I simply want to encourage you to continue to work together and with the community to find solutions for affordable housing for our very, very necessary workforce. I'm going to share with you some petitions of my neighbors and friends encouraging you to make workforce housing your #1 priority with this council and future council. As we meet, employees at Long Cove Club are signing petitions and are encouraged that there will be progress. There is no doubt in my mind that now is the time. Our community is clamoring for solutions, so please earmark the resources needed to advance this work. Thank you.
Thank you. Ma'am?
I have even more petitions than Sandy has.
More petitions? Just give it to the young lady in the back here. when you
Okay,
finish, okay?
that indicate commitment of residents to this crisis. We've had no hesitancy when we ask people to support. They've overwhelmingly said yes. So we have probably a total now of 500 or more. I don't know how many Sandy had. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next? Gentleman in the back? This- What, and then you can go first, and then Jack next to you. Yeah, sure.
I'm Ken Campbell, a resident on the island. I guess the interesting things about today's meeting that I found, one, Alex, you're alluding to sand and the beach and erosion. We've had tremendous erosion. It's been of our workforce, okay? It happens, it keeps happening, and we're to a crisis. I think it's really important that this council on the 1st takes action. Vote on that. If you vote it down, you vote it down. You're all leaders. We need you to lead. We've been on workforce housing for a long time. So please vote. And if it passes, but vote. And please don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We can't do, I believe that all of you are capable of working on transportation and housing. Transportation and whatever it is. So please, you've heard a lot, consider it. I hear some concern about government. My personal philosophy on government is it's evil. I don't like government, but it's a necessary evil, and it's necessary locally. What I would not have known 30 years ago, I do know now, that when it comes to workforce housing, government is a necessary evil. It's not sufficient, but it's necessary. So please, take the positive action. I would also suggest that you let the city manager know that there will be opportunities coming along once you've passed this, and I hope you'll pass it, but tomorrow, November 9th, November 10th, November 11th, there'll be opportunities on this island that he has to be instructed, pursue them. The funding source may not be ready. The community may wonder, but be ready, take action on those properties. Get properties put under contract. Do something with them. Don't just let them slide by. We've let them slide by too long. thank you, and appreciate you voting yes a week from today.
Thank you. Jack?
Mr. Mayor and members of council, town manager, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm Jack Alderman. I've lived here on Hilton Head Island for 32 years. And for every one of those 32 years, we have needed better options for workforce housing. And for many of those years, town council and organizations around the island and the residents have been equivocating on this issue. That time is over. The time to do it is now. Please do it, starting next week with your vote. Thank you.
Next, who's next? Anybody in the back?
You can go ahead, Jim. I just got off work, I'm sorry I'm late.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, town manager, my name is Morris Campbell. David and Tom, you have done an outstanding job of bringing us to this point again as far as this process of affordable housing or workforce housing, or like Ms. Becker and Alex said, homes for people. Very, very important. I think that what you've done today is commendable, very commendable. I think the staff and the team who has pulled us to this point of a framework to move forward with is very, very impressive. And, you know, this is another step. It's another opportunity. It's another effort to move us off the dime. And I think that we need to move off the dime. That commitment that the town has basically committed to get us to this point is one that I admire, and I think that it is a step in the right direction. But to stall it at this point is not an option. We need to move forward. Not only are people who are coming here to work having difficulty continuing to come, but people who live here, who have been here for generations, moving off the island and moving to Bluffton or moving to Ridgeland or someplace else, and that's just not right. Yes, there are people who own property here that are having a tough time as far as getting those houses out of the ground, but certainly the town can help with that, and I encourage you to do that. I worked in county government for years, and Josh, of course, is back there. I'm going to just say something that I hope this is not the case with this effort, is that we usually study things to death. And we usually come up with plans and put it on the shelf and allow it to become a part of our libraries. We don't need to do that with this. The one project that we worked on and are still working on in the county system, or they're working on it in the county system, was the Defusky Ferry system. Josh is very familiar with that. We used to say that if you want job security, get that assignment, because it'll never get never get finished, because we all have had our part with that. So please, let's not make this housing effort or a home effort a forever or a lifetime project. Let's do something and let's move forward. And thank you all for your effort, David and Tom.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else before we close it out? You're shy? You got in late.
Hi, everybody. I've been on the island 42 years. My family's pretty affluent here. My name is Teresa Duncan. How is everybody? I hear, I've been in the rental business here for 30 years. I love our island. My family's done a lot here. I'm not going to name it all. That's not why I'm here. I work for Sea Pines Resort. I think that, and I had to get permission from my bosses to say this, they're right on track when they bought the tract of land across from Captain Woody so that we could house, does everybody know this, our workers. And we had to do that. Why? Because there's nowhere for them to rent.
Can you speak up here, please?
Oh, there's nowhere for them to rent. I basically would say this. We've gotten to the point, though, that it's been band-aided long enough. There are places here, again, I'm in the short-term rental business. Let's look at we'll go down Cordella Parkway. Let's look at Woodhaven. Let's look at Treetops. They used to be all long-term rentals. Now everybody there is short-term. People call me all the time, every week or two. I get so many calls. Teresa, can you find me this? Can you find me that? I'm to the point now that I care about our workers, our workforce, and that's who I'm trying to find rentals for. Guys, it doesn't exist. I call my owners, I'll say, hey guys, someone's looking for 3-4 months, blah, blah, blah. You have to train your owners, by the way, which I do. And we're to the point now is where are we going to go with this? You can't go to the HOAs. It's already been voted by the board that it's short-term rentals. Where I live in Sea Pines, there's no rentals allowed. Not to be disrespectful, workforce would probably not be living there. But the point being, where are they going to go, guys? I know where they're going to go. I spent the last 3.5 weeks driving around the island. I've lived here for 43 years. I know everybody. I know 3 landlords right now, meaning people that own properties here. One of them's been sitting there for 15 years behind Riley's. I know the owner. The place should be renovated. Let's do something and do it affordable housing. That property across the street, let's see, here's my bank at Wells Fargo. What's the road there? They built the culinary school there. Who goes to the school there? Do you know anybody that goes to school there? I'm by there 3 or 4 times a day. I live in Sea Pines. The only people I've ever seen there that's parked there, if they're having a meeting, there's been 10 cars there, and I think they have a beach drop-off shuttle. Let's take that property back. I believe the town bought it. Let's take that property back and let's do some affordable housing there. We have affordable housing area behind Riley's.
You'll finish
We
up,
have
your time is up.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
That's what we need to look at.
Thank you very much. We've heard from the citizens now. I can't, somebody, a hand behind the pole.
Yeah, Tom.
Tom, I didn't see you behind the pole there, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the Town Council present, staff, as well as consultants, as well as the public. My name is Thomas C. Barnwell, Jr. I am a native of Hilton Head Island. Short term, I've only been here for 87 years. I am happy to say that you have made many of us, you, the town council members, as well as staff and consultants, have made many of us feel happy today because of your subject matter on the agenda. You are making progress. I am here to ask each of you as council members, please vote in favor of this presentation that has been presented here today. It is a discussion. I made a note here that town council have been discussing off and on since 1994. That's when, thanks to one of your council person serving now, Councilman David Ames, brought up the RUDAT, excuse me, and a part of the RUDAT report had as one of the components housing. Of course, town council did not do as what you're doing, make an effort to educate the public. That council many years ago got rid of the committee, got rid of the concept, and that's why we're in this serious problem. Before I sit down, I'd like to say to you that I'm one of those few persons on Hilton Head without an awful lot of community grants, grants from foundations, etc., but utilize my family as the foundation for a resource, utilizing family land and our family resources, economic resources I'm referring to put affordable housing on Hilton Head. You can check it out. Thank you very much. Positive.
Hey, before we adjourn now, Mr. Orlando has a couple statements to make.
I think there have been a couple of statements that left unedited are a little bit misleading, at least from my standpoint they are. I appreciate them. I'm sure Tom appreciates them. But Tom and I do not deserve the leadership congratulations. Missy, Kyle, and Tammy do. They're the ones who have been in the trenches virtually 24 hours a day for the last 3 weeks. So once again, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ames, for recognizing Missy. We all think the world of you and Kyle and Tammy. I just want to give a quick update before we leave today while folks are here in the town council. A quick update on our North Point Housing Public-Private Partnership. We know that some time ago we released requests for qualifications. 10 folks submitted a bid. Of the 10, we invited 7 to submit a proposal. Those proposals were submitted first week of November. We will schedule interviews to interview the 7 finalists within the next couple weeks. I know that Krista's been reaching out today, if not today, tomorrow, to schedule those interviews. Second week of November, we'll score the finalists, and I'll start wrapping my mind around a potential development partner. I couldn't do the work without the help of the North Point Housing Committee, the Housing Advisory Committee, as it's called. So I appreciate the folks that are on there. With the full intent that I come before Town Council first quarter of 2023 to lay out the program, right? And that would include a public-private partnership agreement, and in that public-private partnership agreement, everything in that contract, so to speak, that we're concerned with. Area, median income ranges, unit types, 1, 2, 3 bedrooms, site building design, the real program, as well as covenants, affordability, how those folks are qualified in terms of working and living on the island, and all of those different factors that will be baked in that public-private partnership agreement. So $1 million pledged. Thanks for highlighting that. A great site. We're learning about it more and more each day. Ben Brown is our project manager on it. He's doing a fabulous job in pushing every day, and I appreciate it. I just wanted to give that update today as we round out this framework discussion. So thank you.
Have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor? Thank you. Thank you, everybody.